Hello everyone. Before we start, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is for you. That's how YouTube keeps sending you stories like this. And now, let's get into it. I grew up in eastern Tennessee, tucked between those low green ridges and narrow two-lane roads that wind like veins through the hills. You grow up learning shortcuts there. Some of them are real, some of them are just stories passed around. My dad used to tell me when I first started driving to never trust the roads that don't show up on proper maps. He said, they'll lead you somewhere, but maybe not where you want to go. I laughed at that when I was a teenager. I thought I knew better. On September 14th, 2019, that kind of arrogance came back on me hard. I was working night shifts at the hospital in Knoxville back then. It was a Friday night, and my shift had run late because a trauma came in just before midnight. By the time I clocked out, it was 12:40 a.m. The air outside felt damp and warm in that sticky late summer way. My eyes were burning from the fluorescent lights. I just wanted to get home to my small place outside Maryville, take a quick shower, and collapse in bed. Normally, I'd take the main highway, but that stretch can get backed up even late at night because of construction crews. I'd taken an old service road a few times in the day when traffic was bad, and it saved about 10 minutes. My dad always said not to drive that road at night. No lights, narrow lane, blind curves. But I'd done 12-hour shifts all week. I wasn't in the mood for 20 extra minutes on the highway with lane closures and blinking signs. So, without thinking too much, I made the turn off Route 129 and eased onto the service road. The first mile wasn't bad. The pavement was cracked but dry, and my headlights threw long pale cones of light that caught the tree trunks leaning in close. The forest there is thick. Pine and oak crowd the edge of the road, and their shadows move like they're alive when your headlights sweep past. It was quiet in the way that only wooded back roads get after midnight. My tires hummed. The dashboard clock glowed faint green. My shoulders were sore. I wasn't paying much attention. Then the pavement ended. I didn't even notice it right away. One second I was on rough asphalt, the next it dipped into hard-packed dirt. My stomach tightened, but I told myself it was fine. The road would reconnect. I'd been through here before in daylight, or at least I thought I had. About another minute in, my headlights picked up a rusted iron gate hanging half open. It leaned at an angle, the hinges sagging like a broken jaw. No signs, no chains, no warnings. It didn't look official. I slowed, but then just rolled through. I don't know why. I guess I figured if the gate was open, someone else used this road too. After that, the road got rougher. Potholes, loose gravel, uneven shoulders, branches brushed against the passenger window. The sound of gravel under my tires changed from a solid crunch to a soft grinding. A second later, the car tilted just slightly on the driver's side. I felt it in my stomach like going down a hill too fast. I hit the brakes. The wheels sank a little deeper. I shifted into reverse and pressed the gas. The tires spun. No movement. Tried again. A deep grinding sound like shoveling wet sand. I leaned forward, gripping the wheel, telling myself not to panic. I opened the door, stepped out, and felt the soft give of the earth under my boots. When I swung the flashlight on my phone toward the ground, my heart dropped. The front driver's wheel was buried at least a foot deep in an old washout ditch. The gravel here wasn't packed at all. It was soft, mixed with mud. I squatted down and ran my hand across it, cold and damp. The air smelled like wet earth. I walked around to the back. The car was tilted just slightly, but enough to make backing out near impossible without help. I pulled out my phone. No signal, not a single bar. I tried holding it higher. Nothing. I stared at the black tree line on both sides of the road. My engine was still running, idling in the night air, the low hum the only sound. I thought about walking back to the highway, but I wasn't sure exactly how far I'd come in. It couldn't have been more than a mile, but it felt longer. That's when I heard it. A metallic sound. A sharp click, like someone setting a metal tool down on something solid. It came from somewhere deeper in the trees on the right side of the road. Not close, but not far either. Maybe 40 or 50 yards. I froze, holding my phone out like it was a weapon. The forest was black. My headlights illuminated only the road and the ditch. Another sound followed. A second metal click, slower, deliberate. I felt every hair on my arms lift. My pulse hammered in my throat. Then a light flicked on, not mine. A narrow flashlight beam, steady and white, cut through the trees ahead of me. Not sweeping, just there, stationary. Aimed directly at my car. I crouched down instinctively behind the bumper. My knees dug into loose gravel. My breath came too fast. The beam didn't move for what felt like a long time. A full minute, maybe more. I could hear a faint hum in my ears from how hard my heart was beating. I kept my eyes on that light, praying it was just some hunter or landowner checking something. But at this hour out here, then the light started to move, slow, steady. The beam bobbed slightly with each step, cutting through low brush. I could hear the faint crunch of boots on gravel now. It wasn't fast, wasn't frantic. It was deliberate. Someone was walking straight toward me. I didn't think. I ran. I bolted into the trees on the left side of the road. The branches clawed at my arms. My flashlight swung wildly, catching glimpses of roots and rocks and dark trunks. I ducked under low branches, scraped my knees, nearly tripped twice. I could still hear the gravel behind me crunching under heavy steps. Not running, just moving. The forest floor was uneven. Thorny vines tore at my jeans. My lungs burned. I stumbled through a shallow ditch, cold, muddy water splashing against my shins. The flashlight beam from the road disappeared behind the trees, but I didn't look back. I didn't want to see how close it was. I just kept running toward what I hoped was the direction of the highway. I could hear my own breath, ragged and uneven. I kept my phone light low, only shining it ahead of my feet to keep from falling. At some point I lost a glove, but I didn't stop. It must have been at least 30 minutes of stumbling through undergrowth and climbing over rotted logs before I saw a faint orange light through the trees. Highway sodium lamps in the distance. I pushed harder, branches snapping across my face, breath rasping in my throat. When I reached the edge of the trees, I came out onto the shoulder of Route 129, covered in mud and bleeding from my palms. The first vehicle I saw was a semi heading north. I waved both arms like a madman. The truck slowed down, horn blasting, and finally pulled over. I don't remember what the driver said. I just remember climbing up, shaking so hard I could barely close the door. The next day, after I got a tow truck to take me back down the road, we found my car. It was still stuck, tilted in the ditch, but the driver's door was unlocked. I'd locked it when I ran. The trunk was open, and there, lying across the back seat, was a pair of bolt cutters that didn't belong to me. I stood there in the daylight with the tow truck guy, staring at those bolt cutters. The forest didn't look threatening in the sun. Birds chirped. The soft mud didn't seem so deep, but the open trunk and the unlocked door made my stomach knot. Someone had been there after I ran. Someone close enough to walk up to my car without anyone hearing a thing. The tow truck pulled the car out easily in the daylight, but the road seemed narrower than I remembered. We hauled it back to town. I had to pay for the mud cleaning, the towing, and some minor undercarriage damage. But that wasn't what stuck with me. What stuck was the silence of that road at night, and the sound of boots on gravel behind me. I never took that shortcut again. I don't even drive that part of Route 129 after dark anymore. I still think sometimes about the way that flashlight stayed still at first, aimed at the car, like whoever held it was just watching me. Waiting. And how calm those steps sounded. Not rushing, not panicked. Like they knew I wasn't going anywhere. I don't know who was out there that night. A hunter, a squatter, someone doing something worse. I never reported it to the police because nothing technically happened. No plates were taken, no property stolen except for some tools from my trunk. But that pair of bolt cutters wasn't mine, and whoever brought them had a reason to be there. Every time I pass that turnoff now, even in daylight, I feel my stomach twist. The gate is still there, still hanging open. I've seen it from the highway shoulder, rusted, tilting, the same way it looked that night. I keep my eyes on the road and drive past. I learned something that night that I should have listened to years earlier. When someone tells you not to take a road at night, There's usually a reason, and I won't ever find out what waited for me if I hadn't run. I was 22, drunk on cheap tequila, and convinced that climbing onto the roof of my apartment building at 3 in the morning was the funniest, smartest idea I'd ever had. It was February in upstate New York, one of those nights where the air itself seemed to sting. Every breath scraped at the back of my throat, and the tips of my fingers were already going numb by the time we stumbled out onto the fire escape. The building was old, built sometime in the 1920s, the kind of brick structure with rattling pipes and drafty windows. I lived on the 3rd floor with my roommate, who had spent the past 4 hours crying into a pillow and then laughing at nothing at all. Her boyfriend had broken up with her earlier that night in the back booth of a bar. It wasn't quiet or private either. She'd been humiliated in front of half the people we knew. I had been trying to make her laugh ever since we got back, opening another bottle every time she started to cry again. We'd been sitting on the floor of the kitchen, wrapped in blankets that smelled faintly like mildew, with the heat barely doing anything. By the time the idea of going up to the roof crossed my mind, the tequila had already made everything feel light and blurry around the edges. The roof wasn't technically accessible. The fire escape ladder only went as high as the 4th floor, and to get to the roof, you had to step across a narrow gap where the old railing had rusted away years ago. People in the building always joked about it being a death trap. That didn't stop us. It felt stupid and thrilling, like we were breaking some rule that no one even cared about anymore. My boots scraped against the fire escape's frozen metal rungs as I climbed. The wind pressed against me like a wall the higher I went. My hands burned from the cold even through my thin gloves. When I reached the top, I swung my leg over the railing and grabbed at the jagged edge of the roof. For a second, my foot slipped against the icy metal. My heart punched hard in my chest. If I'd fallen, it would have been at least 30 feet down. But I caught the corner of the roof with my fingers and pulled myself up. I remember standing there with my breath clouding around my face, looking down at the streetlights below. Everything was quiet. The snow that had fallen earlier was crusted in patches along the edge of the building, broken up by piles of cigarette butts and a few crumpled beer cans. The roof had always been rumored to be used by kids who snuck up here to smoke weed or drink, but I'd never actually gone up before. My roommate followed a few seconds later. She laughed the entire way up, the kind of breathless laugh that came more from exhaustion and alcohol than actual humor. We sat near the chimney, shoulders pressed together, passing the tequila bottle back and forth. The roof was slick with a thin layer of frost. My jeans soaked up the cold, and after a few minutes my teeth started to chatter. It was stupid and reckless, but it felt good to be up there, far above the dull, silent apartments below us. The city was quiet at that hour. No cars, no people, just the faint hum of distant traffic and the occasional gust of wind scraping against the side of the building. That's when I heard it, a faint metal-on-metal sound like something being dragged. I froze with the bottle still in my hand. At first, I thought it was just the wind catching some loose piece of roofing, maybe the antenna or the drain pipes. But then it came again, slow, sharp. I turned my head and squinted toward the far corner of the roof. That's when I saw it. Someone was sitting there, not standing, not moving around, just sitting in a crouched position near the ledge opposite us. Their knees were pulled to their chest, arms wrapped around them. They were wearing something dark, maybe a sweatshirt or jacket, but their feet were bare against the frozen rooftop. Barefoot. In February. At first, I thought I was imagining it. My vision was already fogged from the alcohol and the cold, but the shape didn't disappear. It was hunched, perfectly still, facing our direction. I felt the hairs rise on the back of my neck. I leaned forward slightly, my eyes trying to adjust to the low orange glow spilling from the nearby streetlight. The person wasn't shivering. They weren't moving at all. It was like they had been there long before we climbed up. My stomach tightened. I could feel the cold air pressing into my ribs. My roommate was still laughing softly behind me, not yet realizing there was someone else on the roof. I didn't say anything out loud. just turned my head enough to get her attention. She followed my gaze. The laugh caught in her throat. The figure moved then. Not fast but slow, almost deliberate. They unfolded themselves from the crouched position and stood up. Their arms hung at their sides loose. Their hair, or what looked like hair, moved slightly in the wind. The bare feet made it worse. It was something unnatural to see someone barefoot up there, in that freezing air at 3 in the morning. The roof suddenly felt smaller. The drop behind us was only a few steps away. The bottle in my hand felt heavy and stupid. I remember how dry my mouth felt, like the cold had sucked all the moisture out of me. I forced myself to stand up, legs stiff, fingers shaking. My boots made soft, crunching sounds against the frost. The person didn't say anything. They just started walking, slow steps toward us, I didn't think. I just moved. I headed for the edge where the railing was missing, gripping the frozen ledge so hard my knuckles burned. I swung one leg over, then the other, trying to steady myself against the gap. My boot slipped once on the icy metal, scraping my shin against the railing. But I caught the fire escape with both hands and hauled myself down. My heartbeat was so loud I could hear it inside my ears. Behind me, I heard the faint creak of footsteps on metal. They were coming closer. My roommate was right above me now, fumbling to get down. Her boots scraped against the steel. When I dropped down onto the 4th floor landing, the impact jarred up through my knees. I turned my head just enough to look back up. A pale foot stepped over the ledge. We climbed as fast as we could. My hands were raw and stiff. The cold was sharper now, almost painful. My breath came out in uneven bursts as we scrambled down the fire escape toward our window. The metal groaned beneath our weight. I didn't dare look back up again. I just kept hearing the sound of feet following us, not rushing, not running, just steady. When we reached our window, my roommate shoved it open with both hands. We tumbled inside like animals trying to escape something, hitting the floor hard. The heat inside felt thin and useless, but it was still better than the air outside. She slammed the window down behind us and the metal frame rattled. For a while, we just sat there on the living room floor, our breaths loud in the silence. I waited for something else. For knocking. For footsteps on the glass. For anything. But nothing happened. No one followed us past the window. We didn't call the cops. We didn't check the roof again. We just sat there, too afraid to even look outside. The next morning, everything looked normal. The fire escape was empty. The roof looked the same from the street. There was no sign that anyone else had been there at all. No footprints on the frost. No discarded clothes. No empty bottles. Just the same dull brick and black tar. We didn't talk about it much after that. We moved out at the end of the lease. Not because of that night specifically, but because everything about the building started to feel wrong after it. Every creak in the walls. Every gust of wind against the windows. I couldn't climb those fire escape stairs again without feeling that slow, steady sound of someone following behind. I still don't know who that was. A neighbor, maybe. Someone who had nowhere else to go. Someone high out of their mind. Or someone who just liked being up there, waiting. What I do know is that it wasn't a trick of the tequila. I can still see it clearly if I let myself think about it long enough. The pale feet against the frost. The way they stood up without rushing. The way they followed, step by step, down the metal fire escape. Sometimes late at night, I think about how easy it would have been for me to slip when I first climbed up. How easy it would have been for one wrong move to send me backward off that ledge. And how whoever that was wouldn't have needed to do a thing. Just stand there, watch. It was a stupid decision. I climbed up there because it felt fun. Because I was drunk. Because I thought the world couldn't touch me. But someone else was already up there, and they were watching long before I noticed them. That night changed how I think about safety. It changed how I think about the spaces we assume are ours when they aren't. I've never gone back to that building. And I've never once climbed onto a roof since. In late August 2021, the air around Priest River felt dry enough to crack your lips if you spent too long outside without water. It was one of those sharp sunburn hot days where the pine needles smell like warm sap, and everything seems to buzz quietly in the heat. I had driven out early that morning with the idea of hiking one of the marked trails near the river. I had done it before and liked how calm it felt out there, away from everything. But when I pulled up, there were too many cars already parked along the trailhead. I could hear people talking, kids yelling, music echoing faintly. It felt crowded. I wanted silence. I noticed another narrow trail to the side, unmarked, mostly just a dirt groove through the brush. I figured it was probably an old logging path. It curved off into the woods where it was quiet. I remember standing there telling myself it would just be a short detour. Maybe an hour or two. I didn't text anyone. I didn't drop a pin. I just grabbed my water bottle, tightened my boots, and walked straight in without even checking the time properly. That was my first mistake. The beginning of the trail actually felt steady. The dirt was packed down, and old tire tracks were still faintly visible. Pine trees towered over both sides, throwing long, shifting shadows across the ground. Dry branches cracked under my boots with every step. The sun was high, the kind that burns through your shirt and leaves your neck sweating even in the shade. At first, I could still hear distant voices and laughter from the main trail, but after 10 minutes, it was just me and the sound of wind pushing through the needles. There were orange tape markers tied to a few tree branches along the way, probably left by hunters or loggers a long time ago. I followed those, assuming they'd lead me somewhere logical. I didn't stop to think that maybe they had been there for years, maybe leading nowhere at all. My water bottle was still half full and I wasn't worried. After about 40 minutes, the markers stopped showing up. I walked a bit more, expecting to spot another, but I didn't. I turned around to look behind me. That's when it hit me how everything out there looks the same. Trees, dirt, pine, sticks. No big rocks or signs to mark anything. I tried to calm myself down. I told myself if I just followed the direction of the sun, I'd find my way back. I didn't consider that the sun moves and shadows change. The heat started pressing on me like a heavy hand on the back of my neck. My shirt was damp, the back of my legs dusty from brushing through dry grass. A couple of grasshoppers scattered near my boots with every step. I noticed my footsteps didn't sound as firm anymore. The ground had gotten softer, more uneven, with loose stones mixed in. I was going downhill without really meaning to. I should have turned back right then. Instead, I decided to keep going. I convinced myself that I'd find some sort of clearer trail, or maybe even a Forest Service road at the bottom. That was my second mistake. Time got blurry after that. When you're alone in the woods with no sound except your own breathing, and the occasional rustle, the minutes stretch. Every tree trunk started to look like the one before. The air smelled strongly of pine and dust. My water was running low and I could feel the back of my mouth going dry. Around 5 p.m., when the sunlight was starting to turn more gold than white, I heard it. The low hum of an ATV engine somewhere downhill. It wasn't close, but it was clear. The sound of an engine in a place where I hadn't seen another human all day was like hearing a door unlock. I started jogging toward it. My boots slid a little on the loose dirt as I moved downhill. The sound came and went, like whoever it was had turned the engine off and on. But when I finally reached the bottom of that slope, there was no road. No trailhead, just a small clearing with a half-collapsed wooden shack. The roof was sagging, parts of it blackened like it had caught fire at some point. Next to it sat an old four-wheeler, its paint sun-faded, seat cracked, tires half buried in dry leaves. There was no key in the ignition. Something about that clearing made every hair on the back of my neck lift. Wasn't even something specific at first. It was the way the air felt heavier there, like the temperature had shifted slightly. The silence was thick. I walked toward the shack slowly, telling myself maybe someone lived out here or used it for hunting. But when I stepped inside, the floor creaked so loudly it echoed through the trees. Inside was nothing but a couple of broken chairs, a rusty lantern, and a pile of old jerky wrappers in the corner. The walls were covered in scratched marks where the wood had peeled away. There was a metal chain hanging from a nail with a heavy hook at the end. It swung a little even though there was no wind inside. It was one of those places that didn't feel abandoned in the way old cabins do. It felt like someone had left not too long ago. The ATV wasn't rusted through. The wrappers didn't look ancient. But there were no footprints, no signs of anyone around. The smell was stale and damp, like dried meat and something sour underneath it. I stood there for maybe 5 seconds before my skin started to crawl. It wasn't a panic at first, just a low, deep warning feeling in my chest telling me to leave. I turned to back out slowly. That's when I heard it, a cough. A clear human cough, not close enough to see but not far either. It came from somewhere behind the shack, low and rough. I didn't wait to look. I bolted. My body reacted before my mind did. I pushed through the brush, branches slapping my arms, snapping under my boots. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't care which direction I was going anymore. I just ran uphill, hoping that if I kept climbing, I'd eventually hit something familiar. The woods turned from quiet to loud. Birds burst out of trees as I passed. Dry sticks cracked under me. A thorn bush tore through the side of my pants and scratched my shin raw. But I didn't stop. At one point, I tripped on a buried root and went down hard on my knees. My palms burned from hitting the ground, but I scrambled up like something was chasing me even though I never looked back. The light started slipping away faster than I expected. By the time I caught sight of the faint glint of pavement through the trees, the sun was dipping low, and everything had that dim, bruised look it gets at dusk. My lungs burned like I'd swallowed gravel. I burst through the last line of trees, stumbling out onto the dirt lot where my car sat completely alone. There were no other cars. The sound of the engine I'd heard earlier was gone, if it had ever been real in the first place. I looked back at the tree line. It was just still and dark, pine needles swaying lightly in the wind. No sign of anyone, no sign of a shack from where I stood. I sat in my car for a long time before turning the key. My hands were shaking against the steering wheel. I didn't drive straight home. I pulled off at a gas station a few miles down the road, washed the blood off my shin in the bathroom sink, and stood under the fluorescent light until my breathing slowed. Later that week, I tried to find the shack on a satellite map, just out of curiosity. There was nothing there. No ATV trail, no structure. I even drove back out there a few days later, stuck to the main trail this time, and walked the edges carefully. I never found that turnoff again. I know what I saw. I know what I heard. That place is somewhere out there in the woods near Priest River, hidden behind pines and dirt and silence. I don't know who coughed behind that shack. I don't know if they saw me, but I do know I'll never wander off alone again. Not without telling someone, not without a plan, and not into places that don't want to be found. I still hike sometimes, but only on marked trails with a map, a fully charged phone, and someone who knows exactly where I am. I learned the hard way that being lost isn't the scariest thing that can happen in the woods. Sometimes the scariest thing is realizing you might not have been as alone as you thought. During college, I spent a lot of time trying to seem tougher than I actually was. I wasn't reckless in the wild, but when it came to proving I wasn't scared, I made some really bad choices. One of the worst started with something simple, a night walk with a few friends during my sophomore year. We went to a place just outside the city, a place everyone at school called the Blind Track. It was an abandoned train tunnel, maybe 600 feet long, hidden off a side road near an overgrown freight line. Nobody really used that part of the city anymore except for graffiti kids and people who liked to scare themselves. We went as a group that night, laughing, pretending we weren't nervous. The tunnel entrance was blocked by rusted fencing, but someone had already cut a hole wide enough to crawl through. The metal edges were bent inward like it had been pulled apart with some kind of crowbar. Inside, the air smelled wet, like old leaves and mildew, and it carried a coldness that didn't match the warm air outside. It was quiet too, the kind of quiet that eats up sound. We didn't go far that night, just a few dozen steps inside with flashlights shaking in our hands. The graffiti on the walls was old and peeling, colors blurred from years of dampness. Some of it dripped down in streaks like black paint bleeding into the cracks. Water collected in puddles that glimmered when light hit them. There was no real light once you got past the entrance. It swallowed everything, like the tunnel wanted to make sure nothing existed except that darkness. We left after 10 minutes, laughing nervously, pretending it hadn't gotten under our skin. But it had. That night stuck with me. A week later, I decided to go back alone. It wasn't a smart idea. It wasn't even a brave one. It was just stupid. I told myself it was to get good footage for a video. In reality, I wanted to prove to myself and everyone else that I wasn't scared. I remember standing there at the hole in the fence on a dull gray Saturday afternoon. The sky was overcast and the air smelled like wet concrete. A light breeze carried that damp smell through the trees. The area around the tunnel was quiet, not silent like inside, but close. You could hear distant traffic from the main road, a dog barking somewhere, maybe a train horn far away. But near the tunnel, everything felt still. I crouched, slid through the bent hole in the fence, and stepped onto the gravel. My boots crunched softly. I carried a flashlight in my right hand and wore my headphones around my neck with my phone recording audio. The tunnel entrance gaped ahead of me, wide and black, almost perfectly circular. The concrete was cracked, covered in layers of graffiti, most of it faded. Moss grew along the lower edges. It felt colder near the entrance, like I'd stepped into the mouth of something that hadn't been disturbed in a long time. When I first clicked the flashlight on, the beam cut through the dark like a thin knife. The air inside shimmered faintly with mist. The walls narrowed slightly the deeper it went, but not enough to squeeze a person. Just enough to make it feel like it was pulling inward. The ground was uneven, scattered with old chunks of broken concrete, glass, wet leaves, and bits of twisted metal. Every step echoed down the tunnel. Even when I tried to walk quietly, it still bounced around like a dropped rock in a well. I kept walking. I tried to count my steps to keep myself calm. At 50 steps in, I couldn't see the entrance behind me anymore except for a faint gray circle. At 100 steps, the gray faded into black. I was completely surrounded by dark. My flashlight only reached maybe 15 or 20 feet ahead, and everything beyond that disappeared into a heavy void. The dampness soaked into my clothes. It wasn't just in the air. It was like the tunnel itself was sweating. A slow drip of water echoed from somewhere deep inside, steady and rhythmic. Halfway through, maybe 200 yards in, the beam of my flashlight hit something shiny on the ground. It wasn't trash like the rest of the stuff I'd stepped over. I crouched down slowly, the gravel digging into my knees through my jeans, and picked it up. A Zippo lighter, silver, clean. It wasn't rusty or dirty. It didn't look like it had been there for long. It felt cold in my hand, like it had just been set down minutes ago. That was the first moment something inside me told me to turn back. I ignored it. I slipped the lighter into my pocket and stood up. That's when I heard it, a faint distant sound. At first, I thought it was just the water dripping or maybe the sound of my own breathing bouncing around. But no, it was slower, heavier, a sound with weight to it. Footsteps. They were coming from behind me. I turned around fast, swinging the flashlight toward the entrance, but all it lit up was darkness, just a thick black void. The sound echoed again, clearer now. One step, another, then another. It wasn't fast. It was steady, like someone who didn't need to hurry. I told myself maybe it was another group of people. Maybe someone else decided to explore, but I didn't hear voices, just the steps. And in a tunnel like that, sound bounces everywhere. I couldn't tell how close it was or how far. It filled the whole space. I walked faster toward the other end. Thought I could just step out the far side and be done with it. But when the beam of my flashlight finally caught the wall ahead, it wasn't an exit. It was a caved-in section. A mound of broken concrete, dirt, and old beams stacked high across the tunnel. The way out was blocked. I stopped dead. My breathing got louder in my ears. My heartbeat felt like it was hitting my ribs. The footsteps behind me slowed too. Then they stopped. I stood there in the damp, stale air, holding my breath, listening. The tunnel threw the silence back at me. My flashlight beam shook in my hand. I couldn't tell if whatever on it was, had stopped moving, or if they were just standing there in the dark, waiting for me to make a sound. Then I heard it. A soft exhale, not mine. It was faint but close. Too close. Close enough that I felt a slight shift in the airbrush against the side of my face. Every part of me wanted to scream. But I didn't. I turned, aiming the flashlight around. But the light only showed streaked walls and dripping water. Nothing else. No shape, no face. Just darkness that didn't want to give anything away. I started walking back the way I came. Faster this time, flashlight aimed dead ahead. My boots hit the ground too loud. The sound echoed like hammer blows. I tried not to run, not yet. But then, somewhere behind me, a single sharp step cracked against the gravel. I ran. I sprinted through that tunnel with everything in me, trying not to look behind. The sound of my own footsteps slammed against the walls, mixing with something else. Another rhythm. Heavier, not rushing, but steady, like it knew I couldn't get away fast enough. The air felt thicker near the entrance, like it was dragging against me. I could see the faint gray opening now. My flashlight beam jerked around wildly with each stride, catching brief glimpses of the wet floor, broken bottles, old cans. My breathing was ragged, echoing so loud it felt like the whole tunnel was breathing with me. When I finally reached the fencing, I didn't slow down. I hit it hard with my shoulder, tearing the loose metal wider. The edge scraped against my jacket as I forced myself through, stumbling out onto the gravel outside. I fell forward, hands slamming into the dirt. For a second, I just lay there. The daylight was weak and overcast, but it felt like stepping into a completely different world. I didn't hear footsteps anymore, just wind and the distant noise of the city far away. I scrambled to my feet and backed away from the hole in the fence. I kept the flashlight pointed at it, expecting someone to step through. No one did. The darkness inside just stared back. I didn't go closer to check. I didn't want to know. I walked fast down the old service path toward the main road. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. I never told anyone what happened. Not my friends, not anyone. It felt like if I said it out loud, it would make it real in a way I didn't want. I threw the Zippo lighter into the trash that same night. Years have passed since then. I've walked through construction sites, under old bridges and through dim parking garages, and every time I get that same tightening in my chest. It's the sound that does it, the echo. It brings me right back to that tunnel. I can feel the damp air. I can feel how close that breath was against my skin. I don't walk under bridges anymore. I don't go near tunnels. I don't try to prove anything to anyone. That day taught me something simple and sharp. Not everything that waits in the dark wants to be seen. Some things just wait. And sometimes, being the one who walks in alone is the worst decision you can make. I was driving north on I-5 in the middle of the night, heading back to Sacramento after a job interview in Los Angeles. It was February 3rd, 2020, and the sky was clear, but the air had that kind of cold that seeps into the car, even when the heater's on. The highway was almost empty, just a few trucks spaced out miles apart. The dashboard clock said 1:15 a.m. My body was sore from sitting for hours, and my brain felt tired in that heavy way where everything blurs around the edges. The radio was low, more to keep myself awake than for any real entertainment. Somewhere near Bakersfield, I saw her. She was walking alone on the shoulder of the highway, her figure faintly lit by my headlights as I approached. She had a small backpack slung over one shoulder and a red gas can in her right hand. She didn't look wild or frantic. She looked normal. Average height, maybe early 30s. Jeans, flannel shirt, sneakers. Her hair was pulled back. She kept walking steadily like she'd been out there for a while. I slowed down without really thinking. The road was so quiet it felt like she was the only other person left awake in the world. As I passed her, she looked over her shoulder at me. Her expression wasn't panicked. It was calm, almost too calm. That should have been my sign to just keep driving, but I didn't. I pulled onto the shoulder a few feet ahead of her. When she reached the car, she opened the passenger door without hesitation and got in like she'd been expecting me. She thanked me in a soft voice, so soft I almost didn't hear it over the hum of the engine. She said her car was just up ahead and that she'd run out of gas. I started driving slowly, scanning the side of the road for a car with its hazards on, maybe pulled over. But there was nothing, just stretches of dark highway and dry grass on either side. We went maybe half a mile before she said, almost under her breath, "Maybe a bit farther." I kept going. Another half mile, no car. She said it again. "A bit farther." She sat perfectly still. The gas can was balanced on her lap, and she was holding it tightly with both hands, like someone holding on to a bag of something precious. I glanced at her briefly and noticed how rigid her posture was. She wasn't slouched or shifting like most tired people in a car at that hour. She was upright, staring out the window into the darkness like she was looking for something specific. After the third time she said, "A bit farther," she stopped talking completely. She didn't move, didn't shift, didn't look at me. She just stared out the passenger window as the yellow reflectors on the highway lines flicked by. The sound of the tires against the road started to feel louder than it should have. Around the time we passed an old rest stop that looked long abandoned. My chest tightened in that way that only happens when your instincts start screaming that something isn't right. The place had boarded up windows, a broken sign half lit, weeds growing through cracks in the concrete. It was the kind of place you drive past a little faster without realizing it. The inside of the car felt heavier. I could feel the warmth of the heater against my hands on the steering wheel, but there was a cold pressure in the air, like a storm waiting to break. I tried to clear my throat to ease the tension building inside me, but even that sounded too loud in the silence. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Her hands hadn't moved from the gas can. I noticed her nails were short, chipped, like she'd been biting them or working with her hands a lot. Her boots were dusty. There was a faint smell, not bad exactly, just something like old gas and dried sweat. Real human smell. I decided I was done. I wasn't going to keep driving aimlessly in the middle of the night with someone who wasn't giving me any real answers. I needed to get out of that situation without making it worse. So I told her I needed to stop for gas at the next station. She didn't respond. Not a sound. She just kept staring out the window. A green sign came up on the right. "Next exit, gas 1 mile." I pulled off. The station wasn't one of those big, bright 24-hour travel centers. It was a small, older station with a single lit sign and 2 pumps under flickering lights. A lone semi was parked on the far side of the lot. The air outside was colder than I expected when I opened the door. She didn't move. She just turned her head toward me slowly. That was the first time she looked directly at me since getting in. And then she smiled. A wide, stretched smile, no sound, no words. Just that smile that felt wrong in a way I can't explain. It wasn't friendly. It was like she was smiling at something only she understood. My stomach dropped. I grabbed my keys, stepped out, and walked fast toward the convenience store. The fluorescent lights inside hummed loud. The clerk looked half asleep but noticed how pale I probably looked. I stood near the counter pretending to look at the snacks but really just trying to calm my breathing. When the clerk stepped outside with me after I muttered something about a woman in my car, the passenger door was open. She was gone. No sound of footsteps. No car nearby. Just the dark highway stretching out in both directions. The gas can wasn't on the seat anymore. It wasn't on the ground either. She had taken it with her. The clerk asked if everything was all right, but I didn't answer. I scanned the lot, the shoulder, even behind the semi, but there was no one there. It hadn't been more than 2 minutes. There was nowhere she could have gone, but she was gone anyway. I drove the rest of the way to Sacramento with every nerve in my body tense. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see her walking along the shoulder again. Every shadow made my stomach tighten. I locked my doors even though I was already moving at highway speed. I didn't stop again until I was 10 minutes from home. The next day, I told myself it was just a weird encounter. Maybe she was hitchhiking. Maybe someone picked her up while I was inside. I tried to leave it at that. But 2 nights later, I walked out to my car to grab something and saw the scratches. They were long, jagged lines on the driver's side door handle. Not like an animal. More like someone had jammed something metal into the gap trying to pry it open. The paint was chipped where the scratches dug deep. I stood there in the cold, just staring at the marks. I checked the passenger side too. Nothing there. Just the driver's door. It was quiet outside. My street was always quiet at night, but that night it felt too still, like even the air was holding its breath. I didn't sleep much after that. For weeks I found myself checking the locks twice, sometimes 3 times. I avoided night drives on empty highways. I couldn't shake the memory of that smile. I started parking my car in a different spot each night. Not because I thought it would stop anything, just because I couldn't stand seeing that same spot, that same angle where she had sat. There was never any news story, no missing person alerts, nothing. Just one woman on the side of the highway with a gas can, gone without a trace. But every time I slide into my car at night, I feel that same air shift. That same quiet that filled the car when she stopped talking. I still keep the doors locked even before I turn the key. I don't pick up strangers anymore. I don't care how normal they look. The scratches on the door are still there. I never got them fixed. I could have, but I didn't. Because every time I look at them, I remember exactly how close I came to something I still can't explain. Not because it was supernatural, because it was real. Because someone was out there that night walking with a gas can, waiting for someone dumb enough to stop. And I was that someone. That night changed the way I drive. It changed how I see people on the side of the road. It changed how I trust what feels normal. Because she looked normal. And that was the worst part of it. When I was 17, the kind of stupid that comes with being bored and curious mixed together was exactly the kind of stupid that got me into trouble. It was early September, just after the first week of senior year in Lebanon, Missouri. The air still held that leftover summer heat, the kind that makes the night smell like warm grass and dust. My best friend and I had been sitting in my car behind the old Sonic on Elm Street, trying to figure out something fun to do. That's when the farmhouse came up. Everyone in town knew about it. People called it the Wilson place, though I don't think anyone actually remembered who the Wilsons were. It had been sitting empty for decades, half swallowed by tall weeds and sumac trees. You could see the roof from the county road, sagging in the middle like the house had exhaled its last breath a long time ago. There was a rusted "No Trespassing" sign leaning sideways near the edge of the field, half buried in the dirt like it was giving up too. People said it was haunted. Kids told stories about figures in the windows and strange lights at night. Of course, none of us believed it. Or maybe we just wanted to prove we didn't. Either way, the word haunted was more like an invitation than a warning when you're 17 and bored. The first bad decision was simple. We told no one. No texts, no calls, no notes. No one knew where we were going or what we were doing. It was about 10:40 at night when we parked down the road and started walking toward the house with 2 flashlights and one stupid shared sense of bravery. The air felt still, like the field was holding its breath. The weeds were shoulder-high, dry and brittle, snapping under our shoes like bones. There was no wind, no crickets, nothing. Just the sound of our feet crunching, and that faint hum of my heart hammering against my ribs. The house looked bigger up close than it ever did from the road. The paint was peeled off completely, leaving gray wood warped from years of rain. 2 upstairs windows were cracked open. Not broken, just open, like someone had left in a hurry a long time ago. We tried the front door first, but it was swollen shut. You could feel it press back like something breathing from the inside. So we circled around to the back where an old kitchen window sat half loose. The screen was long gone. My friend boosted me up, and I shoved it open with my shoulder. It scraped loudly, echoing in the dark. That sound alone should have been the second warning. The smell hit me first. It was a thick, wet stench that sat in the back of my throat like something rotting. Mildew, mold, and something else. Something sharp and sour like a dead animal left too long. When I dropped down inside, the floor sagged beneath my weight. It made this creaking groan that traveled through the house. My friend climbed in after me, landing with a thud that made the dust shake from the ceiling. The kitchen was stripped down to bare wood. No cabinets, no appliances, just outlines where things used to be. There was a single chair on its side against the far wall, and a few broken plates on the floor, like someone had dropped them mid-meal decades ago. The wallpaper was peeling in long strips hanging down like tired skin. We moved through the house slowly, using our flashlights like nervous spotlights. Every step made a noise, the kind of noise that doesn't blend into the night but pushes against it. We passed through what used to be a living room. The windows were boarded up from the outside, so our lights bounced off the wood and came right back at us. I remember how small that made the space feel, like the walls were closer than they were. The stairs were off to the left of the living room. They curved up in a tight spiral, steep and narrow. The banister was half ripped away. Before going up, we checked the downstairs rooms. One had a rusted bed frame with springs poking through like ribs. Another had nothing but a closet door hanging crooked from one hinge. Upstairs, the air was hotter, trapped and unmoving. Dust floated in the flashlight beams like tiny insects frozen mid-air. There were 3 rooms. The first one was empty except for a broken mirror lying face down. The second had old linoleum peeling up in curled edges. It smelled faintly like something wet had once been there, but it was long dried out. The third room was the one that made everything go wrong. It looked like a child's room, though nothing in it was new. The floor was covered in a thin layer of dust that made our footprints stand out like ink. In the center of the room there were piles of old children's clothes arranged in a perfect square. Little shirts, dresses, socks, all stacked and laid out flat, not crumpled. It wasn't random. Someone had taken time to place them like that. They were faded from sun and age, some with yellow stains, others almost paper thin. I remember staring at it longer than I should have. The flashlight beam was shaking in my hand, making shadows jitter across the walls. It felt wrong. Not scary in the way haunted houses in movies are, but real quiet wrong. Like stepping into something you shouldn't have seen. Then came the sound. It wasn't a creak or a house settling. It was boots on wood, real weight. Measured, deliberate. Coming from downstairs, we froze. The sound of those steps was clear and slow, like someone taking their time. My friend's flashlight flickered for a second, which made it worse. My heart slammed in my chest so hard I could feel it in my neck. The boot stopped halfway up the stairs. Not at the bottom, not at the top, just in the middle. That stillness was worse than the sound itself. It meant someone was standing there, listening. We didn't say anything. We didn't breathe loud. I turned my light off because I couldn't stand the thought of whoever it was seeing it from the stairs. The darkness wrapped around us like a fist. I could hear my own breathing bouncing in my ears. The steps didn't move again, but they didn't go away either. We backed away toward the window at the end of the hallway. It was old and stuck, but adrenaline is stronger than rotten wood. My friend shoved it open first, and we climbed out onto the small overhang above the kitchen. It creaked under our feet but held. Then we dropped into the weeds below, not graceful, just desperate. When we hit the ground, I didn't look back. I ran. My lungs burned after the first 10 steps. The weeds scratched against my legs, the dry stalks cutting at my skin. It felt like running through a sea of knives. I could hear my friend behind me crashing through the field. The house stayed quiet, but I swear I could feel someone watching from those upstairs windows. We reached the road and didn't stop running until my chest felt like it was caving in. The night air hit cold against the sweat on my skin. My hands were shaking so hard I dropped the flashlight onto the asphalt, and the light rolled into the ditch. We didn't talk. We just got into my car and sat there, breathing like animals cornered. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel when I finally started the engine. I don't know who was in that house. Maybe it was someone living there without anyone knowing. There were rumors later about squatters staying in abandoned places around town. Maybe it was just some guy passing through. Or maybe someone used that house regularly, and we walked in at the wrong time. We never went back. A year later, in the fall, they tore the house down. I remember driving by on my way to school and seeing a pile of splintered wood where it used to stand. It didn't look haunted anymore. It just looked like any other forgotten thing, gone and quiet. But I still remember the sound of those boots stopping halfway up the stairs. It's not like a memory, you see. It's something that sits in your bones, reminding you how fast things can turn wrong. The worst part wasn't the house. It wasn't the clothes on the floor or the rot in the air. It was the fact that no one knew we were there. If something had happened, if we hadn't made it out that window fast enough, no one would have even known where to look. We would have just vanished into the weeds behind an old, forgotten farmhouse. That night taught me something ugly and real. Bad decisions don't have to come with flashing warnings or ghost stories. Sometimes they're just quiet choices, like stepping through a window into a place that isn't yours, and realizing too late that someone else is already inside. I left Denver late that morning, July 14th, 2022. The sun was already hot by the time I merged onto I-80, and I remember feeling restless even though the day had just begun. I'd planned to make it all the way to Reno in one push, about 15 hours if I drove steady, and only stopped for gas and food. It wasn't the smartest idea to do it alone, but I had convinced myself I'd be fine. I liked driving long stretches of highway. I liked the quiet. The open road gave me time to think. By the time the sky started to lose its color, I had already crossed deep into Nevada, surrounded by endless scrubland and dark silhouettes of low mountains in the distance. I remember the air inside the car turning stale. Somewhere past Elko, I cracked the window just enough to let in a dry rush of wind. It had that faint, dusty smell like hot rocks and sagebrush. The highway stretched straight for miles, barely any curves, the broken white lines flashing under my headlights like a heartbeat. I hadn't seen another car in at least half an hour. My shoulders were stiff from sitting so long. My eyes burned from staring at the road. Told myself I'd stop at the next rest area, use the restroom, stretch my legs for a minute, maybe grab a drink from the vending machine. Just a quick break. When the blue rest area sign appeared, it felt like a small relief. 2 miles ahead, I slowed down a little and switched off my music. The silence made the night feel heavier. The rest area came up on the right, a single looping ramp curving into a flat open space lined with faded parking slots. A small concrete building sat near the center. There were no streetlights. The only light came from the vending machines glowing in front of the bathrooms, casting a weak greenish hue across the pavement. The rest of the place was swallowed by darkness. I pulled in and parked close to the building, leaving my engine off but my headlights on for a few seconds. The place looked completely empty. Then as my eyes adjusted, I saw a black pickup sitting at the far end of the lot. No lights, no movement, just a shape in the dark. It wasn't facing the building. It was angled slightly toward the exit, like it was waiting. For what, I didn't know. It was far enough away that I couldn't make out any details. Just a shadow. I told myself it didn't matter. Lots of people pulled into rest areas to sleep. Truckers, travelers, anyone trying to save a night in a motel. It wasn't that unusual. I turned off my headlights, grabbed my phone and keys, and stepped out. The air outside was cooler than I expected. A strange kind of still. No wind, no insects, just quiet. My footsteps on the pavement sounded sharper than they should have. I walked toward the restroom, my eyes drifting back to the pickup more times than I wanted. Nothing moved. I forced myself to keep going. The vending machines made a soft humming sound, the only real noise in the whole place. When I pushed open the restroom door, it echoed off the concrete walls inside. The fluorescent lights flickered faintly but stayed on. It smelled faintly like bleach and old water. A single stall door was open, the rest closed. Everything felt too quiet, like a building that wasn't used often. I took care of what I needed to do as fast as I could. When I washed my hands, the sound of the water splashing in the sink seemed too loud, almost like it didn't belong in that stillness. I remember staring at my own reflection for a second. My face looked pale under the buzzing fluorescent lights, tired and drawn out. I told myself I was just exhausted from the drive. Nothing more. When I stepped outside again, something changed. The pickup wasn't where it had been. It had moved closer. I could see it clearly now, sitting 2 rows away from my car. It hadn't made a sound. I hadn't heard an engine start, hadn't heard tires on gravel. Just there, closer. I froze for a few seconds, standing there with the door of the restroom behind me. I felt my heartbeat pick up in my chest. I scanned the lot. Still no other cars. Just me, that truck, and a stretch of highway out in the middle of nowhere. I walked quickly back toward my car, not running but fast enough that I could feel the pull of panic creeping in. My shoes crunched softly on the pavement. Every step made me aware of how alone I was. When I reached my car, I fumbled the keys. The sound of the metal hitting the ground was sharp, and for a second my hands wouldn't work right. I grabbed the keys, unlocked the door, slid into the driver's seat, and slammed the door shut. My breathing was loud inside the cabin. The second I turned the key and my headlights came on, the truck's headlights flashed to life. High beams. They blasted directly into my windshield, filling the car with blinding white light. I squinted, my pulse hammering in my ears. The pickup didn't move. It just sat there, lights burning straight into me. I didn't wait. I threw the car into reverse, backed out fast, and pointed toward the ramp back to the highway. As I pulled onto the ramp, the truck's engine roared to life. Its lights swung as it followed. I accelerated onto I-80, pushing past 70, then 80. My hands were locked tight around the steering wheel. My rearview mirror showed nothing but those high beams sitting right behind me. The highway was empty. No taillights ahead, no headlights behind. Just me and that truck glued to my bumper. They never tried to pass. They never slowed, just kept the same distance. I pushed the pedal down harder. Watching the speedometer climb, mile after mile they stayed. My throat was dry. I could hear my pulse in my head. The road signs blurred past, each one feeling like it might be the last chance to do something. 5 miles felt like 50. The black landscape on both sides of the road seemed endless. There was nowhere to turn, nowhere to stop. I scanned the horizon for anything. Gas station, town lights, another car. But it was just darkness. When I finally saw the faint glow of a gas station sign ahead, it felt like air filling my lungs again. It wasn't big, just one of those 24-hour stations with a small store and a few pumps. But it was lit. It meant people. I didn't hesitate. I swerved off the exit ramp too fast, tires humming hard against the asphalt. I didn't care. I just needed to be somewhere not empty. I pulled into the parking lot, parked near the entrance, and jumped out without even shutting my door fully. I turned back toward the exit ramp. The truck didn't follow. I watched the highway as a pair of bright beams slid past without slowing down. Just kept going west. I stood there for a few seconds, chest heaving, hands shaking so hard I almost dropped my keys again. The parking lot light hummed above me, buzzing with moss circling the bulb. It was the most welcome sound I'd heard in hours. I finally went inside the gas station. The air smelled like cheap coffee and old floor cleaner. I grabbed a bottle of water and just stood there at the counter for a while, letting the fluorescent lights soak into me. The cold from the fridge doors brushed against my back. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I could still feel the burn of those headlights in my eyes, like they'd etched themselves into my brain. I sat at a small plastic table by the window, looking out at the pumps. I thought about how easily it could have gone the other way. If I hadn't seen that sign, if the truck had followed me somewhere else, if something had happened on that black strip of highway with no one around for miles. I knew that rest area had been a bad decision the moment I stepped out of the car, but it didn't hit me fully until that moment, sitting there under harsh fluorescent lights, surrounded by nothing but the quiet hum of the gas station. I waited there for over an hour before getting back on the road. I wanted to make sure that truck wasn't coming back, that I wasn't being followed. When I finally did start driving again, every set of headlights in the distance made my stomach tighten, but the road stayed empty. No black pickup. I made it to Reno just as the first light of morning spread across the sky. My shoulders ached from tension, and my throat felt raw from breathing too hard. I parked at the motel, turned off the engine, and just sat there for a while. I thought about that empty rest area, that truck sitting in the dark, the way it had followed me without a sound. I realized how easy it would have been to disappear out there. No one would have known where to look. That night changed how I travel. I don't stop at empty rest areas anymore. I don't trust places that feel too quiet. I plan my routes carefully, pick gas stations with lights and people. I still like long drives, but that night burned something into me. The open road isn't always just open. Sometimes something out there is watching, And sometimes the only thing between you and a story with a very different ending is one lit sign on the side of the highway. It was January 2nd, 2015, and the cold in Brainerd felt like it was trying to cut through my jacket. The kind of cold that didn't just sit on your skin but sank into your bones and stayed there. It was around midnight. The cabin behind me was lit up with that yellow, hazy glow that only comes from old bulbs and a wood stove burning too hot. Everyone was inside drinking, laughing, music leaking out through the cracks around the door. My face was warm from the alcohol, and my breath came out in slow clouds that drifted into the blackness over the frozen lake. The lake stretched out in front of me like a blank sheet of white. Flat, quiet, endless. The snow on top was hard-packed, crusted over from the last freeze. It looked solid. It sounded solid when I stomped my boots down. I told myself that was enough. I didn't need anyone to tell me whether it was safe or not. I'd been on lakes before. Ice this time of year was supposed to be thick. I'd seen snowmobiles on it plenty of times. It was fine, I thought. It had to be fine. There was a snowmobile sitting near the shed, half buried in powder, its seat slick with a thin glaze of frost. It belonged to my friend. I didn't ask. I just climbed on. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. I remember the exact sound when I pulled the starter. That hard, hollow choke before it caught. The engine sputtered, coughed, then roared awake, the sound carrying across the silent lake like a low growl. I felt a small jolt of adrenaline as I gave it a little gas. The tracks chewed at the snow, spitting powder behind me, and I grinned to no one. The cabin lights looked smaller once I pushed out from the shore. The sound of music disappeared into the cold. It was just me, the snowmobile, and the wide, dark lake. The stars overhead were sharp and clear, the kind of winter sky where everything feels too quiet. My headlights cut a cone through the darkness, showing a stretch of untouched snow ahead of me. It felt clean, perfect, almost too perfect. The air hit my face like shards of glass, burning at the edges of my nose and lips. My hands were already stiff inside my gloves. The farther I went, the more it felt like I was leaving everything real behind. About 100 yards out, the sound changed. It's strange how quickly a feeling can shift from fun to panic. It wasn't a loud noise, just a soft, low groan from beneath the snow. It was wet, hollow, the kind of sound that makes your stomach drop before your mind even catches up. I felt the surface dip beneath the weight of the machine. Not break, just sag like a mattress when you sit down too hard. It was subtle, but it was wrong. I froze. My hands clenched the handlebars so tight I could feel the plastic edge pressing into my palms through the gloves. I should have killed the engine and backed away, but my mind didn't work right then. I panicked and did the worst thing I could have done. I revved the throttle. The track spun, chewing into the snow, and I felt the back end sink lower. A jagged crack ripped out from under me, shooting in every direction like lightning under the ice. I'll never forget the sound. It wasn't a clean break. It was a deep splintering snap that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I jumped. I don't even remember deciding to do it. 1 second I was sitting on the snowmobile. The next, my boots were slamming into the snow a few feet away. The surface gave under me. Not fully, but enough to send a surge of icy water shooting up through the seams of my boots. It felt like a blade. My breath locked in my throat as the cold wrapped around my feet and ankles. The snowmobile tilted forward, groaning, the front sinking first. For a second, it just hung there at the edge of the hole like it was deciding what to do. Then it slid down into the black water with a heavy, gurgling sound. The headlight disappeared first, swallowed in the dark, and then the tail end followed, leaving only the jagged hole behind. I lay flat on my stomach without thinking, pressing my chest into the snow, spreading my weight out as wide as I could. My breath came fast and loud in my ears. The ice made a low, shivering sound beneath me, like it was whispering a warning. The air smelled different here, like wet metal and something sharp. I couldn't see the bottom. I couldn't even see the snowmobile anymore. It was just gone. The shock of the cold in my boots was already spreading up my legs. My jeans were stiff and wet at the cuffs, the damp fabric freezing in the wind. I dug my elbows into the snow, inching backward, careful not to put too much weight in one place. Every push felt like it took forever. My gloves were coated with powder that melted against the heat of my skin, soaking in. My fingers started to go numb almost instantly. I didn't look back toward the hole. I didn't want to. All I could picture was the dark water waiting underneath, ready to swallow me if I slipped. The lake that had looked smooth and harmless a few minutes ago suddenly felt alive. Not in a magical way. In a dangerous, cold, uncaring way. It didn't care if I fell in. It wouldn't pull me out. If I went under, that would be it. The cold would close over me, and no one would know until morning. When I finally reached what felt like solid ice again, I just lay there. The stars above me looked the same as they had when I started, but everything else felt different. The sound of my own breathing was harsh and uneven. The edges of my jacket were stiffening from the moisture. My boots were heavy with freezing water. My toes burned at first, then slowly started to fade into a dull ache. I pushed myself up onto my knees, feeling the cold wind slice through the wet fabric like knives. My legs trembled when I tried to stand. The shore looked farther away now than it had when I started. It wasn't, but in that moment it might as well have been a mile. The cabin was just a small box of light. Nobody had seen what happened. Nobody even knew I was out here. I had a sudden, sharp thought that if I slipped again, if the ice gave way somewhere between here and there, no one would hear me. The lake would just swallow me, and the light from the cabin would keep glowing like nothing had happened. I forced myself to walk. Slow, wide steps, listening to the sound under the snow with every footfall. The surface creaked and moaned, but it held. My feet were blocks of ice inside my boots. Every step sent a dull shock of pain up my calves. My hands were stiff, my fingers clumsy, and the wet fabric on my jeans was turning hard with frost. The wind hit my face and cut into the damp edges of my neck. I could taste the cold in the back of my throat. When I finally reached the shore, I stumbled. The snow was deeper there, piled up along the edge of the lake. I fell to my knees and just stayed there for a second, gasping. My heart felt like it had been squeezed tight for too long. I looked back out across the lake. The hole was just a black shape now, a patch of darkness against the white. It was quiet again, completely still, like nothing had happened at all. The snowmobile was gone, pulled down into the cold without a sound. By the time I made it to the cabin door, I could barely feel my feet. I left a trail of uneven footprints behind me, half filled with powder. My jeans were frozen stiff at the cuffs, the fabric clicking when I moved. My gloves were crusted with snow and ice. The doorknob burned against my skin when I grabbed it. Inside, the heat slammed into me. My face stung as it thawed, and my boots made wet, slapping sounds against the wood floor. The others were still laughing, still drinking, music still low and warm, like nothing outside mattered. I stood there dripping, my chest still heaving, and realized no one would have even thought to look for me if I hadn't come back. Not for hours, not until morning. Later, after I peeled off the wet clothes and sat wrapped in a blanket, I couldn't stop replaying it. The sound of the crack, the dip in the ice, the way the snowmobile just slid down without a fight. How close I'd been to going with it. I kept staring at the frost on my boots, thinking about how easily everything could have ended on that dark patch of ice. No noise, no warning, just gone. The snowmobile stayed at the bottom of that lake until spring. They had to pull it out with chains when the thaw came. Every time I looked at the frozen water that winter, I saw the black hole in my mind. I never set foot on the ice again. Not once. That night was the last time I ever called it solid.